You're very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. For this episode, we're going back to America, East Coast of America, to a guy called Joey Kilrain, the founder of Dead. And he has clients who range from Fortune 100 companies to startups, and also a professor from the Fashion Institute of Technology. Born and raised in Philly. Joey, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Rian.
Delighted to have you. Typical fashion with the podcast, focus on three areas: early influences, challenges, pivotal moments, while providing value in all those three, or particularly in the latter two. So no different with you. Born and raised South Philly. Any favorite memories, standing memories from growing up there?
Oh, absolutely, man. Philly has got a lot of history. There's a lot of inspiration to come out of it. I know Philly can get a bad rep because people, they know that they're kind of short fused down there and the like. But what I will say with Philly is that it absolutely opened my mind up to creative expression. No doubt about it. So in the very beginning, like my parents, unfortunately, I come from a broken home. But that didn't stop my mom and dad from providing me influence. My mom always kept me engaged in some sort of like creative arts, whether it was pottery or, you know, drawing and painting and that kind of stuff. But my dad always kept me mechanically inclined, always kept me engaged in something he was building or something he was doing. So it was good. But it wasn't until I started getting into graffiti that I realized self-expression.
Okay.
And that was amazing. And not to mention, because back then we did have a lot of money, I couldn't afford the expensive, colorful spray paint. So I always had to get my spray paint cans from the value box. And these were like mustard yellows and like cobalt blues that people are like, these colors stink. But that's all I could afford. And what they did was allowed me to use any color to make something cool. And I became like kind of like, it didn't matter. Like whatever I could afford is how I had to do expression. So yeah. So besides that, the other thing I got out of Philly was definitely integrity. While back then they would say just keep your mouth shut. That's the integrity, like don't say nothing, won't be nothing type thing. But I learned a lot about how to stand by the people that are with you. And I think as a businessman now, having the team of people around me, the reason why they stick around isn't because I can pay them a lot or isn't because of anything more than that. They know that they're going to learn with me and they know that I got their back. And that was something that really helped. Obviously, I gained that affiliate, that bigger thing.
How important is empathy then, based on what you just said?
So empathy, depending on what it's in regards to, it does get into some muddy water. So, for example, empathy for Philadelphia, for example, I see gentrification, and gentrification is both good and bad. It's good because we're bringing in new stuff. It's bad because the people that have lived there their whole lives and can't afford it anymore have to move on. They feel the pressure. And it obviously lends itself to a lot of the political stuff that goes on in Philly where they see the crowd coming in that can buy two houses and they can barely afford their one house. And that's intimidating. And plus they bring in perspective of how they want to live their life that doesn't fit the mold of how you have lived your life. So what you perceive to be the way it should be and the way they perceive the way it should be don't always get along. So when it comes to the empathy part, from a designer perspective, it's a little bit easier because then I just know I have to focus on that customer. But if it comes from like a neighborhood perspective, yeah, that's where it gets kind of muddy. And I don't know how you can easily answer that because it gets into politics, it gets into religion, sexual choices, or just how I am. And yeah, and which is an awesome topic, but definitely something where it's definitely relevant to that particular group that are struggling with it.
Originally from Philadelphia, I've only been there to get the train down to Baltimore. We spoke about this offline.
Yeah.
I'm actually hoping to come back out in November 1st to November 7th is when I've got my flight booked. Something else we talked about offline, hope you don't mind me asking you, I can take it out if you do, is you said Capoeira. You spent some time in Brazil, and that was one of the things that changed everything about your life.
Yes.
Talk to me.
Yes. Yeah, awesome. So it's Capoeira. And it took me a while to get that as well. And I think the pronunciation for some, because it isn't a common word that we use. But yeah, so as we spoke about offline, when I was younger, growing up in Philly, you got to be good with your hands. That's it. Now, I wasn't the best, but I also didn't run. and I definitely got my fair share of beatings and landed when I could. However, what I didn't realize, and I think for the younger generation or the younger group that might be listening, the first thing, at least two things that I would recommend to them is first, learn how to defend yourself. You don't need to fight everybody, but I think when you know how to fight, there's a certain level of confidence you have in yourself after that. And
Mm-hmm.
then when you're in difficult conversations, it's not going to go to a fight, but at least you're not intimidated by that, and that gave me a lot more confidence when I technically learned how to fight. Versus like you learn on the streets, guys show you some tricks, whatever. But when you technically learn how to fight, especially with the breathing that's required to fight correctly,
Mm-hmm.
that changed how I handled stuff. So I didn't like all the time. Like you kind of calm yourself down a little bit, and I found that to be very effective in meetings with people or in situations that were getting kind of difficult. The other thing that I would recommend to the audience is to learn comedy, because when learning comedy, you don't need to crack jokes all the time, but you can read the audience better when you take those classes, because then you're seeing how the crowd is, and I found it to be a better way for public speaking. But with capoeira, as I mentioned when we talked offline, yeah, I got into a fight with a wrestler in Philly, and yeah, he busted me up pretty bad, and I had a stand-up game. Got long limbs, long arms, and I was able to keep the guy at bay. But the minute he got my wrist, that was it. I had
Game over.
no way of getting out of that, man. Yeah, and at that point, yeah, like they had to peel him off me, and I two guys had to help me home. Head was all bloody, face was all messed up, and had a massive lump in the back of my head because the way he took me down, and I hit the concrete, and a little bit of a wake up call. And I realized, yeah, I'm not that kind of fighter. But what got me into capoeira was some guy at the gym saw me hit the heavy bag, and from there I saw this sport, and I kept saying capoeira. I didn't know how to pronounce it, but once I saw it, I'm like, yo, that's amazing. Like, how do you stop that guy? He's not like typical boxing. You're standing straight up and you got your hands up here.
Mm-hmm.
You think this dude is like kind of moving left to right. He's doing his little cartwheels. He's pivoting down, and I was thinking like, yo, how do you stop him? Like, I don't know. And then what inspired me, because I'm a 6 foot guy, I thought, yo, most of the guys I encounter are shorter, and they want to get in closer. And as a boxer, you want to keep them at bay. Why? You want that distance because I have the jab. But
Mm-hmm.
once I got into capoeira, it's got jiu-jitsu in it. It's got some kung fu. It's got kind of a mix of a bunch of things. But that absolutely changed the game, because what capoeira gave me was that there's always an option. You always have an option to get out of something, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that might be. And it's definitely philosophical, but also from physical as well. Like, how do you like sidestep a problem? Like, kids riding by on a bike. Most people jump out of the way. Capoeira, you're so nimble on your toes that to spin around something is quite common, because yeah, that's what they teach you in all the training and the like. So for me, it definitely opened up my eyes to there's more than just one way to get something done.
You certainly can't have a big ego when you're practicing it either.
Yeah, because they also make you dance, and most guys of our complexion are not the best of dancers, at least for me, of course.
I'm
And
with you.
but yeah, but it you have to people are watching, and you're going to be silly, and guess what? It's okay,
Mm-hmm.
totally okay.
Before we get into business, I do have a question related to that. You talked about um, the fight that took place in Philly, and sometimes in life there's moments where you meet a road and you have an option to go down path A or path B, and that was probably a moment where you had an option to just accept the beating and potentially recluse and just go into yourself, or say, I wasn't the better fighter in that scenario. I don't want that to happen to me again, and I want to be in a better situation when that happens. What was going through your head when after that happened that made you go down path B rather than path A?
Uh, so I never ever thought I would be like a big time fighter, right?
Mm.
I always knew art was my calling. That was it. Some people they wait for the call, other people just go, and I just went. That's what I did. I've always been this creative guy. I've done like even everybody in Philly knows what I do with that, and it's just always been that way. Now, with that said, you still had to defend yourself, and so I got into that. Now, I was never a big mouth, guys will tell you that in Philly. I never went around bragging about things, but yeah, I was a target. Why? I was a nerd. I was geeky. I had a head as big as ET. on a body for like a 5-year-old, so it kind of looked weird. And yeah, it was a lot of picking, a lot of bullying and that kind of stuff. But yeah, there were situations where okay, like I had to stand up, and I would stand up to a lot of people. Why? Because I was tired of being picked on. And yeah, in a lot of cases, it did end well for me because I wouldn't back down. And then,
Okay.
so that point though, like what the turning point was, I don't think it was so much that the fighting. What the turning point was for me was when we started learning about drugs and the guns got involved and that kind of stuff. And that's when I
What
was
age
like,
was
dude,
that?
I was like teenager, like 16, 17.
Mm,
You know,
gotcha.
it probably started like earlier because I used to use. They had like different drug paraphernalia near my house when I was younger, and I used to use that with my GI Joes, which again, kind of crazy, but I had no idea what it was.
Mm,
And of course, like my parents didn't realize it. Which now, as a parent, I watch everything my kids do because I thought, oh snap, I was that close to it as a kid, and they
mm,
didn't know and I didn't know, right? And I'm not blaming anybody; it just that's what happened. But when I got into my teens, it was really big with hip hop and rap, uh, and yeah, you started seeing stuff that I thought, yeah, dude, that's not me. You see somebody with a gun, that changes your perspective really quickly, especially when they hold it in their hand. They're like kind of like being stupid with it. I'm like, yo, that's scary. So for me, that's when I knew I'm not a gangster. It was shortly after that when I graduated high school and got into college that I saw a big divide between my friends from the neighborhood and my career because I was spending more time reading and learning what it is to be a designer. And it had nothing to do with not wanting to hang with them. I mean, till this day, all the friends in my neighborhood that I grew up with, I'm still friends with them. We still talk on Facebook,
nice.
actively, right? It's like almost daily we talk with that. So I still have a really good rapport with them. But when I was younger, yeah, the decision just kind of happened. Where all right, I'm going to pursue design. I'm going to make this happen.
And you moved to New York for that.
Yes. So moving to New York happened for one big reason, which was at. So I graduated when I was 21, and everything was cool. I got a job at this company, and it was called Devon Direct, and I learned a lot from those guys. And unfortunately, there were three friends. One of them that was so dear to me that all passed away in the month of November, and I went into a dark spot for a minute. As a
Mm,
young guy, I didn't know what was going on. I was 23 now, or yeah, I was no, it was yeah, I was 20. I was 21. I was in total disarray. My family was worried because I was super quiet. I wasn't really like associated with a lot of people and the like. And then I just got this idea to go to New York and it was sending faxes, right? That's how I had to get in there. And yeah, within 3 months, I was living in Queens, New York. That was it. I had
nice.
no friends, no family, and I took a massive risk because the guy said to me 2 weeks prior before I moved, he says, I'll call me in 2 weeks and I'll see if there's a job for you. I went on the second week, I just went up there that day to like take the job. And he goes, oh, I didn't know you were coming. I said, oh, I thought you wanted me to start today. And then to make it even funnier, I even asked for a $700 cash advance because I still had to get my apartment in Queens. So
Wow.
totally, yeah, totally. Talk about being dumb, naive. Like I had no idea, but I knew that. Yeah, I was going to New York, and
Acting the part.
yeah, yeah, no, man, it was amazing. And I think a lot of times people they try to control it, and I absolutely just kind of floated, like
Mm,
it was just gravity. That's all it was, and I just gravitated there. And when I got to New York, it was amazing. Like I for the first time I thought, yo, I fit in. I don't feel like I got to worry about someone trying to beat me up or take my basketball or something, right? Like and even at 22 or so, I still had, there was still beef down in Philly. There's still a lot of guys that were trying to find their way. And I just got, confident in myself and I just went to New York. And then from there, you snap your fingers and it's 17 years and
it
all
goes
the
by
amazing things
fast.
that happen. Yeah, man. And then you get like, for me, um, like living there, meeting all the people that I met. I met so many different cultures, and that's what allowed me to travel and work in other countries. I got crazy curious about visiting other places where, like the flights were only like $800 round trip with a hotel, And
Nice.
I didn't know this back then, but the Europeans were way ahead of it. Where you could beat somebody and just stay at their house, and it's all good.
Mm-hmm.
It's all
Couch
good.
surfing.
Yeah, but that wasn't common in the States. And when I learned that trick, dude, oh my God, it was like all over Europe. Like I was going every like 6 months because I'd make more than enough money. I had a 1 bedroom apartment. I never had a roommate, and I just would, just go, and then I could work remotely because I was a nerd, and I could just plug my laptop into any like broadband or Wi-Fi connection that I'd find, and I was gonna get the work done. So the money was still coming in. I was getting to travel,
Living the
and
life.
it was amazing, man. It was totally amazing. And I think there's a lot of people uh, like to take the risk. Could be a little scary, and I think a lot of people always think about they're going to fail. And my argument is, well, what if you succeed?
Well, that's a question I have for you actually, because I want to get into your current venture, Dead, founder of it. But you've mentioned risk. Um, some founders I talk to openly discuss the idea of fear, um, as a business owner. Now, there's risk involved as a business owner, but how do you manage that? You know, the 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 topic of fear when it comes to running your business, because it's completely different to working in the corporate world. Your brain is always thinking about the business. If you stop working, the money stops coming in. It's difficult to switch off at times, particularly in the early days. You can get very little sleep because you're always waking up and then taking down notes. So when it comes to fear, how do you manage that?
Well, from a business side, I see no
Mm-hmm.
difference between my name on the door or someone else's name on the door.
Okay.
Because if someone else's name is on the door, you can get the axe any day of the week. And with a client, same thing can happen. They give you the axe any day of the week. Now, what I look to do, and again, talking about bumping into people, I had the chance to meet Richard Branson a couple
Wow.
years ago. Again, talk about cuckoo bird. I also met Warren Buffett, which is another thing. But with Richard Branson, to see him standing there, I remember I was like awestruck. And I'm like a butterfly. I can socialize with anybody, but I didn't know what to ask him. And one of the women that were with us, there were 8 of us. One of the women had asked him, "How do you retain your talent?" And now this is something where, after he said it, I've been doing this for years, but he put it in words. He says, "Well, what I do is I help people so much and educate them so much that they can leave whenever they want to, but I treat them nicely so they won't." And when I heard that, I thought, dude, that's
Big.
exactly how I am with my customers, where you could go at any time, but I always got your back. I'm looking out for you. Now, granted, I may not be as the same price for some other people, and I think that's no different than buying a fancy car versus an inexpensive car, right? Like you know what you're getting. But I
Mhm.
have that reputation, and you know that if it breaks, I'm going to figure it out. You know, I'm in your corner. And one of the biggest challenges with tech is finding the nerd that's creative, and
Yeah.
that's what's allowed me not to be as scared. Like, yeah, I know I'm going to make a mistake. You're right. You're looking at a massive mistake right here. But what I also know is that if I'm worried about every second of the day, it's not healthy. Number one. Number two, how I how I don't get into that problem is you set expectation. So if I say, "Hey, Rian, we're going to talk today
Vital.
at 12 o'clock," okay, that's the time we're going to talk. Or if you could expect work from me, expect it at this time. Or if a wonderful question is, what if I go over budget? How do you talk to the client about that? And these are
Wait.
all things where I think you gotta be really strong with yourself first before you
Mm.
can, get into that. Because if you're already scared and you try to run a business, it's no different than working for someone.
Yeah. It reminded me of when I was younger, my father used to ask me to cut the grass. And initially in the early days, I'd say, yeah, I'll cut the grass. But he'd always ask, did I just cut the grass? But just tell me when you'll have it done by. That's all he wanted to know.
Mm.
And if it wasn't done by then, you're in trouble. But if it was done by then, fine. And ever
Yeah.
since then, I've always had that expectation of, if someone's doing something, I'll tell them. You can expect it to be on your desk by end of
Yes.
close of business on Friday, so it'll be there,
Yes.
and
That's it.
and I think that's vitally important.
Yeah.
Before we jump into the questions around business that I have, because I'm incredibly interested in the conversation with you can you tell the listeners what it is that your business does? Because that's
Awesome.
important to the next part of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. So what we do, we are a digital experience design company, DED company as the acronym, and we provide user research, visual design, and then more importantly, how do you put it all together? So from a customer research standpoint, I think a lot of times people don't like research because when you get the feedback, it may not be what you, the customer, or you, the client, want to hear about how the customer interacts with something. And there's a lot to be said about that. For those that uh, uh, don't want to hear the bad news, you're part of the problem. You get in the way of the customer and you need to give them what they want. Otherwise, they'll go to somebody else. And I think it's a very easy solution. Either you kind of listen to what they want and make it work, or someone else is going to do it for you. But on the flip side, for those that have to administer the bad news, you have to say it in a way that you're not scaring them to death. Like you want to have a plan. So, for example, we had one customer where they were merging all these different techs. They bought all these companies and they're trying to merge it all into one tech. And of course, it's not all going to work out. So what we came back with, we interviewed the people they wanted to, but then we went and met with customer support and the dev team, because customer support is dealing with the problems all day, and the dev team is going to tell me where all the bodies are buried in the code. And
Mm-hmm.
that insight, in conjunction with what the stakeholders wanted to hear, we were able to balance what we're going to get done. So low hanging fruit is, well, the login button isn't working. Well, you should fix that, right? That's a very basic one.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to get these two big techs that you bought to work together is not. So why do we keep them separate for the time being and then figure out a way on how to merge them in the future? You're not going to do that overnight. So simple stuff like that is what we do there. That's from a research part. The visual design part is more like creative, like how do you make it look right? And with that, we look to remove all the emotion from the conversation. So basically, if you ran one the color blue, I would say, okay, that's a safe color. But if that color blue is not ADA compliant or WCAG compliant, maybe we shouldn't use it, because certain customers won't know that's it. They may not see the color contrast with the words over that blue.
Now,
Uh,
I know what ADD, American Disability something, but what's the second
Act.
one you mentioned?
That's the Web Consortium. Hold up, I don't have it off the top of my head, but WCAT is the Web Compliance. That's what it
Gotcha.
is. Yeah, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. But we
Mm-hmm.
just say ADA here in the States with it. The WCAG is mostly for Europe. But again, the principles are the same, right? They have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of similarity between the two. But yeah, and then the last part, believe it or not, is the handoff, because you'll have a lot of creative guys that'll do like all this awesome stuff, but none of it matches to the CSS or to the grid and framework of what you're building into. So now you have this awesome layout that may not convert into code. And now all you did was just a pretty picture. It's
Yeah.
not gonna, like, the tech ain't gonna work. Or the best one, and this is an easy one to envision. I I can't stand pie charts.
Okay.
I can't stand them because pie charts, when you see it, you think of like a pizza, like everything is an even cut. Now, if we have 5 points on that pie chart, let's say four of those slices are only 1%. And then the fifth one is 96%. So you're going
Mm-hmm.
to see this huge big circle and then these four little slivers, and it's super hard to see the content in there. People that have dexterity challenges won't be able to move their mouse onto that because their hands might be shaking, right? And not to mention, if you do it where, let's say you have more than just 5 points, what if you got 20?
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible. So whenever you see a pie chart, it always looks like the perfect balance of like maybe 50, 30, 20. But what happens when it's 97 or 98 and then 1%, 1%? It's just like, it's
Mm-hmm.
dumb. So
Makes
yeah,
sense.
all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's what we do. We just provide the reality around that. So yeah, so it's
Incredibly, incredibly interesting for a creative, no doubt.
yeah, and it's where, like, again, as a designer, we look to give you the reality of what it's going to be. A lot of times, or another great example. So some of the customers I work with are in India, and if you don't know, some of the Indian names I think are almost double the alphabet. right? Like that's how many characters they have in their name, but your name field only accounts for 7. Joseph, Connor, right? Like there's not a lot of characters. And when you go to someone to India, and I'm like, yeah, so you've absolutely alienated people
Mm,
that may have a longer name. And now that we're so like the whole planet is a melting pot to some degree. Like everyone's name, you can have a super long name anywhere. Yeah, I find a lot of guys just make it work for like Joe or Jane or something dumb versus no,
mm.
like think about like it's such a wide range out there. What about Balakrishna? How do you put that in there? You know?
You you take care of the little small minute things, but on a large visited website, those things matter because they're visited a lot.
Yeah.
Like the name thing you talk about, and the colors and everything. Customer experience is something that springs to mind, and I know you wrote an article around measuring the ROI, return on investment, of
Uh huh.
customer experience.
Uh huh.
So customer experience is the umbrella to the entire experience the customer will have with the business. What's the biggest mistakes that you see organizations make when developing a customer experience model?
Well, so customer experience can be a variety of things, right? But if we keep it simple, let's
Mm-hmm.
say we're trying to improve how the customer interacts with the product, right? And
Yep.
a really basic guideline or principle we use for that uh, is customer support getting more or less tickets? So if they're getting more requests because they can't figure something out, okay, well then that's something we've done incorrectly. On the flip side, if they're getting less calls about it, that means it's done correctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in order to do that, you want to interview who that person is. And usually with customer experience, you have 2 categories. You have the pro users and then the beginners. So pro users are someone like yourself where you could get in and I already know how to use Zoom
Yep.
like that really quick. Like if you want to change your background in Zoom, you probably know how to do that very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But for a beginner, they may not know that. And how do you do it? And with Zoom, you have to do a lot of hovering on the screen. And then you get the options that come up, then you go and select it. So from a customer experience standpoint, an ROI would be if most of our customers are struggling to know how to change their background, how do we make that easier for them to change the background? And is there a button that we put out in the open, or maybe it's something where it never goes away? What is that? But that's where you would start to do the research around that audience and find out what are the beginners struggling to find versus those that are pro users.
Interesting. Background, video backgrounds, another topic you've spoken about. And for the viewers of this video, I recommend tuning into YouTube for this particular segment of it to see what we're talking about. Why do you think virtual backgrounds, particularly in the last 18 months, have become very important? Because I know the story behind a lot of the car registrations behind you and
Yeah,
the hair or the barber.
the barber pole, yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So tell me, why do you think virtual backgrounds are important?
Oh God, I mean, for me, it has been an absolute branding experience. So for the people that know me, they know I build a lot of old cars. I've been doing that since I lived in Philly. Matter of fact, I'm building up an old truck on my driveway,
Nice.
currently.
Hmm.
But with that, yeah, like that gives a glimpse into your world. Like, what is it that you do? And it's a conversation piece. And with anything, anyone, you want to make that a personal connection with people. And ironically, with classic cars, it's amazing how many cultures love old American muscle cars,
Mm.
whether it's Corvettes, Camaros, Impalas, whatever those are. And those are all Chevys because I only work on Chevys. But with that, yeah, like you can have a conversation piece start off, and that helps to break the ice versus the camera just clicking on and then it's business as usual. So to make that
Mm.
personal connection for me, it's been wonderful. And then for those that we go to my LinkedIn page, yeah, my background border is my wall license plates, and people know right away, like, oh, this is the guy. So there's a part of me that doesn't want to go back to the office because this room has become branded for me. So they
Mm.
know, like, yeah, this is the guy. Like the connection is there.
We've got a studio upstairs that my father uses a lot because he trains a lot of sales organizations, and he has his kitted out to tell his story. His grandfather has a camera from World War II that my father has,
Mm.
and other things as well. So but I never thought of it. I just looked at it as a cool thing. And then when I heard you talk about the background, you've definitely inspired me to change mine, because mine, if anyone's looking, it's just a whiteboard and a light at the moment. So definitely need to add more to mine so I can tell my story.
Yeah, you know what I would recommend is
Mm-hmm.
you could take a green screen and you could put a green screen on the door in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could have that green screen as a mask. So that means you could have like outer space, or you could have something peak, like something totally off the wall. And like there's
Narnia.
another one. Yeah, there's another one where the guy has himself recorded moving around in the background. So as I'm talking to you, imagine a Joey. Yeah, it was. And I'm like, dude, that boom, you're done. You're creative.
That's
Like,
a good idea, because
yeah.
I've got a green screen cloth on the ground so they can easily hang up on that door. Put like the terrifying clown that pops up halfway through a Zoom call.
Yeah, or it could be, you know, you know who your boxing buddy. I don't want to name names,
Oh
but
yes,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
you could do that. You could do promotions with that as well. That could be another thing. Like this week sponsoring XYZ. Let's say Coca-Cola, right? So by the way, this is what we do as designers. As I learn more about your personality and I think about what your business can do, this is where we start to come up with these ideas that isn't a fortune. You're not looking at gajillions of dollars. You're looking at something where, a little bit of creativity to existing tech.
I've got a couple more questions left for you, Joey. But
Sure.
before we get to that, you said Coca-Cola, which reminded me, I've got a new favorite Instagram page, Heads of Society. It is fantastic. There's one that I was looking at that says, "Can you guess which one's who?" And it's the Beatles. And I'll stick an image up here on the recording. Again, another reason to go watch the recording rather than listen to the audio. But wow, how like
Heads
they're
of
all
society.
brilliant.
Thank you, sir. So
it is amazing.
that gets into, again, the eclectic part of me and why it's sadly it has been a bit of a challenge to put myself into a box, because that's what society wants, to fit you in a box. But yeah, I just I'm like water, man. I just kind of like mend around stuff. So I've been an illustrator or for as long as I've been a designer. I like to call myself creative because I think that makes it easier because I get involved in other stuff. But yeah, so Heads of Society started years and years ago. I did an illustration of a bean head, and the woman, Judy Law, she had said, "Oh, it looks like a bean head." Basically, it was a head shaped like a bean with eyes on it. That started moving forward. Maybe 5 years later, I stumbled on the word cokehead. Now, cokehead, we know what that is, right? But I did a can of Coke on a guy's shoulders. At that point, I realized, oh my God, there's Knucklehead, there's Richard Head, there's all these different ways you could say the word head. And I started back in like 2000 painting these things. But paintings require a wall, and I was running out of wall space, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to stop painting them. Fast forward 10, 15 years later, I got an iPad and started drawing on the iPad, and then I did all of these different heads. Not to mention the internet became more open, and what I did with the heads, the only thing that I do is that I make sure that the heads are not derogatory. So anything like, I won't do skinhead. Not going to touch it. I'm not going to do chicken head, because that's a derogatory slang towards Black and Latino women. But I will do shithead. Why? Because anybody can be labeled that. And yeah, and then it just became fun. And so far, I've done, I don't know, I've got about 100 heads completed. But then I started learning like all these other heads, like Buffett head. And, or not Buffett head. Oh, yeah, that's it. Because the guy, the singer, Jimmy Buffett, they're called parrot heads. And I did parrot head because it's all fans of Jimmy Buffett. There's dead heads for Grateful Dead. And then there's obviously other ones that the list goes on and on. But yeah, Heads of Society just started off as fun, and all I've been doing is like creating illustrations. I actually, if you like, I could email you or mail you some actual stickers, because I made a bunch of stickers of them as well.
Yeah,
Dope. And they're all the safe ones. They're not of the ones that might get you in some trouble, but.
I don't mind getting in trouble every now and again. That's what makes life fun.
Yeah, I could write a book on that one, getting in trouble and getting out of trouble. I think is another one.
As I said, a couple more questions. Digital presence, having a digital presence online. Two-part question. One, why should someone invest in their digital presence? I look at a lot of C-suite executives that don't have a great digital presence online. And two, the latter part to that is, what do you see people overlook when they decide to get started with implementing a digital presence online?
Awesome. So those that don't have a digital presence, I respect your privacy. Some people
Mm-hmm.
don't want it, and I got you. However, the way the world is going, I think you need to have some way for people to see who you are. Now, again, you can live under the radar, and that's fine. But the way things are, people want to see you. They want the camera on. They want to be able to, make a relationship there, and I think it's important. But what I'll say for those that are involved in it, managing your digital presence is a job within itself. So all those posts I make, all that stuff, man, to do that and all the other things, it's impossible. So you have to delegate. And what I would recommend is you find someone that can help you manage your LinkedIn profile, your Instagram. You can still do your stuff, but you need someone to help you with the day to day. Otherwise, yeah, you'll be sending out links for opportunities all the time, and then trying to manage all those opportunities. And I'll give you an example. So one of my colleagues is looking for a new job, and one of the drawbacks to looking for a new job is rejection. You get a lot of rejection. A lot of people,
Yep.
and it could be anything. It could be the fact that and most of those job AIs are terrible, right? They look for the amount of keywords and that kind of stuff, and I've never found them valid, with the exception of like you go and talk to someone. However, you get all that rejection, and if you see all that rejection, it starts to weigh on your conscience that you're not good enough. Nobody wants to hire you, and if you get 10 rejections in a week, come on, that's terrible. But when you have someone managing that for you, you don't see those rejections, and that person, similar to like a designer, where they're saying, okay, based on feedback I'm getting, we need to start doing these kinds of things in your resume or these kinds of things on LinkedIn. That's a way better feedback than someone saying not interested. So to have someone help you with that is critical, and it could be a little expensive for some, but I would say, yeah, again, find a way to get it to work. There may be a bartering situation where me as a designer can help that person with their website, or me as a designer can help you with your branding or something. Maybe there's a balance there. Or, like, for example, with Heads of Society, I have someone who helps me with that. And, and funny, she posted all the Beetlehead stuff, but I only post on Fridays. She could post any other day of the week, but I get to post on Fridays. And the reason for that is on Fridays is when I release the new head, the new one that goes out. That's the only time I'll post it. And I don't know, I don't really have a science to it. I just kind of do whatever. Like I tried for Paul McCartney's birthday, I tried doing the Beatles for his birthday, but I unfortunately missed it. But again, that's the kind of stuff I try to do with it. However, all the other days of the week, she can post whenever she wants, when she wants.
There's some great ones. Picklehead, Snakehead, Rockhead, Picklehead, your latest one. Brilliant. Two final questions for you, Joey.
Yes, sir.
You talk about your style in one of your articles. Uh, Once you're branded to your style, you feel as if you have you've deciphered the Da Vinci Code. I'm reading the quote that you put down, which is why
Yeah,
I
yeah,
paused for
yeah.
a second. You said you once thought you were an artist, but you're not. Um, why do you believe that process and protocols are so important?
So I am a massive fan of the process, and I don't worry about the outcome as much because the
Mm-hmm.
outcome will always be there, but the
Yeah.
process will always change. And I find that absolutely fascinating. To go through my style of illustration and having it evolve over the years is just a testimony to being dedicated to something you believe in. I've always found that the amount of work that goes into understanding how you get things done, I think, is way more important because you are learning yourself. So you can have inspiration from others. For example, I've had tons of inspirations. I've met some of them. Like I actually met Milton Glaser. I got to study and work with him. And if you don't know who Milton Glaser is, he's done a lot of big brand identity. He did the I Love New York identity. He
Hmm.
did the New York Times. He did the Brooklyn Lager. identity. He's done a lot of stuff, this guy. And unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But meeting these types of guys only inspired me to go and pursue what I thought it could be. Like, what does that look like to Joey? And that also gets into a little bit of your voice, because most of the times people want to copy others and they're very scared to be themselves. And I'm the opposite of that, where I don't mind being foolish, right? I mean, I got a little bit of the boxing in me, right? So like, yo, because you got a problem, bro, we'll take it outside of you, right? But, jokes aside, I think that in a lot of cases, as you're trying to define your style, you start to stand out. And that's where you want to be. You want to stand out. You don't want to be, I don't know, like, again, you could be kind of like too far out there, but people like that. And then you could be too close to someone else and be kind of confused as to who really did it. But for me, that process of understanding and figuring out your style, yeah, that is deciphering the code. Because once you figure out your style, that's it.
It hit home, the blog did, and I took my time reading it, and it's probably my favorite blog that you've put out. I'll leave a link to it below where people are watching or listening to this if they'd like to read it themselves. Final question for you is, and this is probably going to be a tough one, because most of the time when I ask people this question, they don't have the background that you do. So all your loved ones are safe, but the room you're in right now is burning down and you can only save one item. Are you able to pick one item that you're going to save?
In this room?
Mm-hmm.
I'll just take my phone.
Okay. So you have no issue with the rest of that stuff?
Nope. Not at all. And I say that only because this is immaterial. Right? My dad had always said, you can, like, because again, building all the cars, what's more important, you or the car? And you spend, like, one of the cars I spent, I don't know, 4,000, 5,000 hours on it over the course of like 2 years. I know it sounds like a lot of time, but you get lost when you're in your passion of your, let's say like you're painting a room. Take a couple hours of painting, but you kind of get into that rhythmic and maybe even cathartic appreciation of just being in the zone and just doing your thing. But at the end of the day, if that room was on fire, like, what's more important? You, like, get the hell out of there, right? Yeah. Like, all this stuff can be bought again. It may not be the same, but that's fine, right? What's more important is just get out of the room. Now, if you said I had to pick between my kids, like that I'm like, oof, like, no, I'll probably burn, like, I'll get them out of the house. The goal was to get them out of the house. But to choose between them, yeah, like, that's a question where, like whoever I can get to first, right? Like, but again, it's like kind of like fighting, right? Like you train, and then the time comes to fight, and it's all training. That's it. There is no like, oh, I'm going to come in with this plan. Like, I guess you can come in with a plan, but you're also going to be a little bit reactive to what's going on. You want to be proactive, but reactive as well.
You talked about breathing at the very start of the podcast, around breathing and comedy were two of the things you touched on. And talking about fighting, actually, some of the elite fighters, they even go to the point of watching how the other fighter is breathing. So when they're breathing out, they'll kick them or punch them in the gut to win them. Or to win them, so that they can then, mount them or knock them out or something. It's crazy when you look at the details of what the fighters are doing, that even paying attention to the breathing of the other fighter, or the breath of the other fighter, notice when they're breathing out, so that you can counter with a punch or a kick, and that can be game over.
But that said, I remember with the Brazilians, they had everything on VHS tape when I was down in Brazil, and they would watch all of these tapes of all these other guys over and over again. And I thought, man, that is, again, they're dedicated, right? But it's no different than a designer and what designers do. And I think if you take some of those principles of fighting or comedy into the business world, it gives you an advantage. Like, you can tell, for example, I don't know too many fighters that immediately start yelling and carrying on right out the gate. They're chill. Why? Because they don't want to blow everything they got just yet. But in meetings, you'll see and hear people, their voices start to escalate. And when I pick up on that, I think, okay, they're either intimidated or something isn't right, and I don't want to make them more upset. Right now, and I don't care where it is. Like, for me, as I mentioned, I have very little pride and practically no shame. I look to try to keep everybody on the same level. So the way I talk to you is no different than how I talk to the wife or my kids.
You know who you are, though, which is not a lot of people know who they are. They truly are. And
Mm.
you do, which is remarkably cool. And I respect and like that. I
Thank
do.
you. Thank you, sir. But I guess with that said, yeah, I don't need to I don't need to build a higher wall. I need to build a bigger table. And if I can find out what upsets you and avoid that, or embrace it so that you don't feel like I'm here to like wipe you out, that's different. And I think that's a way where, again, with fighting, when you see someone getting agitated, you're already starting to think, how do I got to get out of this, right? Because I don't know too many people who want to get into a fight outside of getting paid a lot of money. You don't want to get into a fight with somebody.
No.
My grandmother had always said, dynamite comes in every size. So I don't care who.
Too
And
true.
then, yeah, and in Capoeira, I wrestled with women that were like 5'2", and they pinned me. And and a note to the listeners: women, because they have a different way their hips are, once they get their legs around you, it's kind of hard to get them off you. and,
You're fucked, yeah.
and yeah, and this woman had actually pinned me where she had pinned my arm over my head with her leg, and I'm like, oh, I couldn't get her off me at all. No matter what I did, I had a tap, but with that, yeah, like it's amazing where you could take these advantages of what you learn from other industries and apply it to what you do, like for fighting or comedy, or another one is cars. Like building all these cars, I don't see the difference between building a car and building a website. To me, it's all the same. The only difference is that one of them allows me Control Z. Right? You break it on the car, you're not getting that off the cloud. There is
Yeah.
no backup for what you just broke. You're going to have to redo it. Where with what I do digitally, yeah, I can undo into infinity
Yeah.
and back it up for as much as I want. So,
You said
good little thought there.
it is. And I was thinking of what your grandmother said. The dynamite comes in all sizes. I moved to Australia 2015 for a year, or 2016. I can't remember. My best mate was living over there. And when I got there, the first thing that he did was, I was jet lagged, so he brought me to a Brazilian jiu-jitsu session with him. And ever since then, whenever I'm out and about, I can understand why you'll never know who's dangerous and who's not dangerous. Like before I went there, I could look at someone and go, I'd take them in a fight in 2 seconds because I'm 6 foot tall and I'm not the smallest character in the world. Whereas now looking at people, I'm like, there could be someone who's 5'5" and skinny, and I'm like, I'm not taking my chances because I don't know what the fuck they can do.
Yeah, yeah, man. But that's a liberative experience too, talking, because when you're younger, you're like, like, what do you know about something? And Lupakis, Gus Lupakis, his dad is a well-known Greek Olympian who, his martial arts is off the chain. And when you see the guy, he's like 5'2". And this guy, such a humble guy. And the thing that always makes me worried are the people that are the quietest and most soft-spoken.
Yep.
They're the ones, because the big loudmouth guys are like, yeah, maybe they could fight, maybe they can't. But the quiet ones, I'm like, yeah, bro, you need to put all 4 eyes on that cat right there, because if that dude is still chill and you're yelling at him, oh, that sounds like there's a lot already going on in his head that I think is going to come out in a fury that I don't know if you'll be able to handle, man. So thankfully I haven't been in that, but yeah. So, but yeah, it's like I said, man, I think martial arts and comedy, that they play hand in hand in the business world. If you can get into that, it may help you as a business owner.
Joey, we'll leave it there. I've had a true pleasure getting to know you a little more over the last hour that we've chatted. I wish you continued success in your life. I know you've been to Ireland 2 or 3 times. If you ever do come back, let me know, and we'll go for a proper pint of Guinness.
Yes, sir.
For now, we'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.